While not always in the mainstream, and definitely not nearly as available anywhere in the West as it is now, manga has had a long and running history in mainstream media. Many genres and series have graced the medium during this time, some of which fall flat while others become pop culture phenomena. Kentarou Miura's Berserk may not have the same universal appeal as Dragon Ball, Sailor Moon, or One Piece, but it's lasted the test of time as a groundbreaking series that's at its best in its original manga. Infrequent Berserk anime adaptations pop up occasionally, but there's no comparison with Miura's amazing artwork that has stood the test of time. Berserk is a revered property that manga fans have praised for decades, but it's struggled to connect through anime adaptations. A major reason Berserk is best suited for manga is that Miura's artwork is such a detailed account of mayhem. Miura's tragic passing in 2021 rocked the manga and anime communities, but it's also made it the perfect time to revisit his signature manga series. Manga, anime, and video games can live or die by the success of their characters and their special powers, but there's just as much importance placed on the weapons they wield. A ridiculous arsenal can turn a mediocre series into a hit. Berserk's guts embodies the stoic warrior trope, but he also brandishes an absurdly huge sword known as the Dragon Slayer. This blade is bigger than Guts himself and practically synonymous with him. So many manga forget to give their weapons as much of a personality as the people who wield them. There is no shortage of fantasy and action manga that let a disgruntled warrior loose in a magical land. Miura's Berserk sets itself apart by the uniquely terrifying details and lore applied to its many demons. Recurring is one of the most famous chapters from Berserk, expressly because of its twisted take on a demon-possessed horse. Berserk is simply unlike any other manga. Additionally, Berserk explains that apostles are demons who used to be human, which adds a darker element to these powerful monsters and indicates a fate worse than death for people like Guts. At the start of Berserk, Guts faithfully fulfills the wandering lone warrior archetype. Guts has experienced enough loss and betrayal that he decides he doesn't need anyone else by his side. However, over time, Guts learns to once again let down his guard and let Puck, Casca, and occasionally Skull Knight work with him for the greater good. It's easy to depict Guts as a ruthless killer, but Berserk is at its best when it gives Guts people to care about and a uniquely powerful fantasy team. There's no question that Guts is the strongest one in his party, but Puck and Casca prove to be vital, too. Berserk is hardly the only seinen manga that filters its storytelling through the dark fantasy genre, but it's become the leading example of how to effectively uncover the darkness of such magical material. What helps stand Berserk apart from other dark fantasy series is that there's an overwhelming nihilism that fills its characters. Guts is unquestionably strong, but he's witnessed such bleak tragedies and views Midland as a broken world, making each of his heroic gestures hit a little harder. He can win the battle, or even the war, but the world itself is too far gone to fix. It's common for manga series to switch authors or share a creative team in order to shoulder the heavy workload. Berserk was such a unique entity for more than 3 decades because it was a singular expression of Kentarou Miura. Miura's unfortunate passing in 2021 meant that Chapter 364, Tear of Morning Dew, is Berserk's last content to be penned by Miura. Admittedly, Miura's best friend and trusted colleague will take over as his successor on the series, which gives its original ending a mythic status. Berserk hasn't had an anime that's attempted to fill in these blanks, which allows this perfect conclusion to live on. Audiences are inherently visual, so it's no surprise that a manga's art is the first thing potential fans notice. Top-tier artwork can be the definitive detail and what turns a manga series into a classic. Some manga succeed on storytelling merits alone, but Kentarou Miura's artwork in Berserk becomes an exercise in meticulous attention to detail. Miura's enviable artwork has helped turn Berserk into a legendary property, and it's largely the reason that the manga's various anime adaptations have never taken off. Even fluid animation can't compare with Miura's still images, each of which speaks volumes and has a palpable personality. Revenge stories have been done to death in pop culture, so the origins of Guts' pain are hardly original. However, what makes his rampage of revenge special is how he processes this trauma. Guts could present himself as an eternally broken man who coldly slices through the evil that he encounters. Guts' mission makes its mark because it allows for moral complexity. Guts remains steadfast in his desire to take out the dark forces in this world, but he feels guilt over some of these executions, as well as those who have sacrificed themselves for his cause. Guts has gotten people hurt, whether he wants to admit that or not, and it makes his revenge mission considerably more layered. There's nothing wrong with action manga that embrace a more light-hearted tone, but Berserk begins in a dark place and only gets progressively grittier over the course of its run. There's something to be said for how Berserk's epic scope resembles that of George R. Martin's Game of Thrones, but Berserk makes Martin's signature series seem like a kid's story in comparison. Game of Thrones and Berserk are both fantasy series where casualties are a common occurrence, but there's a callous nature to these losses in Berserk that makes them sting more. Guts looks like a fearless hero who can defend himself, but he's suffered more loss than most people will ever experience, which only adds to his hardened nature and complex characterization. Berserk is the perfect middle ground and gateway fantasy series for those who are curious about the genre but don't quite have the diligence that's required for high fantasy fare, like The Lord of the Rings. Berserk's dark fantasy setting establishes its own voice and unique eccentricities, but it's still very much akin to that of Martin's Game of Thrones series. Berserk is set in an old European-inspired world that's been ravaged by supernatural forces and creatures, which leaves the world paralyzed in fear. Berserk goes beyond the standard dragons and medieval monsters. Its creation of new entities that riff on fantasy and horror staples is a testament to its success as a distinct dark fantasy series that doesn't feel derivative of others. Guts is Berserk's centerpiece when it comes to conflicted warriors. However, Griffith is another major player in Berserk's Kingdom of Midland. Griffith is a complex character whose true intentions aren't immediately obvious, which only makes him more terrifying to people like Guts, who used to fight by Griffith's side. There are lengthy passages in Berserk where Griffith isn't present, but the character's return always marks some of the manga's most captivating material. Griffith knows Guts better than his own friends do, which makes him a continually formidable antagonist who Guts can't hide from. A strong narrative is not going to build up any momentum without a compelling main character. Berserk's Guts is an all-time classic who is hard to beat. This masculine protagonist might seem like a generic fantasy hero on the surface level. Guts is quiet, carries a massive sword, and is massive in stature. However, there's more to Guts than meets the eye. Guts is a man ravaged by tragedy. Everything good in Guts' life that has ever meant anything to him has been brutally taken away. In spite of these devastating losses, Guts always fights his way forward. He's someone who never gives up, even when it might seem hopeless, and is one of seinen's most inspirational action heroes. It's fair to view Berserk as a revenge story, but it's the curious characters themselves who are responsible for the greatest shifts in Midland and beyond. Guts is driven by rigid values, but the cast of characters that come to fight by his side are equally passionate about their cause. These central relationships push Berserk's plot forward. The series' core trio of Guts, Griffith, and Casca is the most pivotal in affecting Berserk's story. Berserk is happy to indulge in extravagant battles and trips to demonic realms, but none of that means anything without the characters who ascribe purpose to it all. Gore and glory come secondary to the characters behind it. It's common for manga to portray its characters in shades of gray instead of clear-cut good and evil. Audiences are conditioned to view Guts as a hero because the story is filtered through his perspective. In the greater scheme of things, Guts' destructive acts could be viewed as acts for the greater good. However, bystanders have ample cause to view Guts as a menace. Kentarou Miura's artwork intentionally blurs these lines with how Guts is frequently drawn to look like a ferocious demon, whereas the evil Griffith looks angelic and pure in nature. Guts and company even rise against emissaries of God, which leaves one to consider if they're truly the heroes or not. Berserk, at its core, is a dark fantasy action manga series. This means that the action displayed throughout its narrative has to be thrilling, well-drawn, and, most importantly, brutal and gory. Only the finest artwork will do, and Miura delivers. Given the fact that Berserk's world is constantly plagued with horrific creatures that wreak havoc on the human world, there is plenty of action and fight sequences that involve Guts and company. These warriors meet their match against some daunting opponents, none of which disappoint. Manga's seinen genre is full of impressive stories that mix cutthroat action with mature characters. There are new seinen series that are destined to be this decade's next big hits. But Berserk manages to trump them all because it's still at the top of its game after more than 3 decades. It's considerably easier to have a seinen series that seems infallible when it only has a few years of storytelling underway. Berserk's longevity proves that it's not a one-trick pony. There's depth to its universe and staying power to its story. Well, that is the end of the video of why Berserk is the greatest manga of all time. I hope you like it. Thanks for watching and bye.